Great. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on how to launch a successful online training program for your association. My name is Alan Reed, and I'm a director of Get Savvy. This session tackles what's turned into quite a hot topic in the membership world because so many associations are either stuck on how to get started on a learning management project or find themselves in the middle of a project that's just failing to deliver. So today we're aiming to provide some advice and guidance to prevent this happening on future projects. I'm delighted to have with me today David Towson, Director of Learning and Assessment at NEBOSH. David, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Director of Learning and Assessment at NEBOSH, like you mentioned. My background has covered all sorts of things. I started off in research in chemical physics and went into work in the chemical industry, but then I went into health and safety training. And of course, that invariably involved e-learning and setting up learning management systems.
Great, great. Thank you so much, David. So, just getting into the presentation. First of all, a little bit of webinar etiquette. The session is recorded and the presentation will be made available to you afterwards. So please don't worry about making any notes. You'll get the whole thing in video and the presentation. So just immerse yourself in the content. Use the chat for any questions or any technical issues, particularly if you have questions about your own project. And then we can put them to David a little bit later on, or I can comment on them as well. So please try and make it as interactive as possible. The content for this free webinar is taken from our online self-paced course, which is called Managing Technology Change Projects for Business People. So that course tackles managing a project in your own organization. So everything from the conceptualization and the business case, what you need to know to get your colleagues on board and funding a project, through to things like the vendor selection, testing, getting change management, UAT, and then preparing for go live, etc. So delegates on this webinar will get a 50% discount on that course as part of the follow-up. So just a word about us. Get Savvy provides three models of support for organizations trying to get going with their own learning management projects. So one of the ways we help associations is by providing a very transparent, cost-effective budgeting model. So we have this very straightforward approach where we try and make everything as clear as possible so that it's easy for organizations to know how to get going and how to then plot out their entire project. We're 100% independent of any technology or supplier, so we provide advice and guidance that's all about you and only about you and your interests. Here are some examples from recent projects where we've worked across a number of different platforms. We really do find that the platform is much less important than than your goals, your resourcing, and the technology supplier that you find to work with you on your projects. We'd be delighted to talk more about that. One of the things that we've tried to do to help associations have successful projects is have a very transparent and cost-effective budgeting model. So it's a very straightforward, small, medium, and bespoke model, so that it's all fully costed and gives you everything you need to have a successful project. Typically, we'll have a no-cost discussion about your project and then provide a fully costed proposal with everything you need to have a good outcome. Very often, we'll start with a smaller strategy piece to help people get going and make sure that everyone's aligned and make sure the organization understands what it's getting into. Okay, so the agenda for the webinar today is really based on how to help people avoid having a bad project. So really, as I've said, an awful lot of organizations don't really know how to get started, or if they have gotten started, they found themselves stuck in the weeds because they don't have the resources or they're missing something else. So we'll start off with the basics of what really matters on the project, the key steps to launching and having a successful project. We're into a new and exciting world of content creation now. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then a little bit about the tools and the tech you need, and then how to make sure that your LMS and learning management project really provides value for you and proving the value for you and your members. Okay, so getting into that, let's start off with what really matters with an LMS. So, and as I said, please do drop in any questions into the chat as we go, so that we can then tackle things about your own project when we get towards the end of the webinar. So first of all, what is an LMS? This is worth asking because an awful lot of people struggle to understand the difference between a learning management system and when they need only a training management system or an events management system. So a learning management system is really something that you use to deliver your learning content. So it will provide a way for an instructor to create and deliver the content. So your organization is the instructor in this scenario, to monitor students' participation in the content, to monitor their progress through your courses. And then, of course, it'll allow typically students a way of interacting with the content. So modern LMS projects are much more than people being able to watch videos or interact with a PDF. It really has lots of features, things like drag and drop and gamification and so on that we're going to talk about in a minute. So effectively, a good LMS will allow you to present content, have it consumed, monitor the consumption of content, but also allow your instructors to manage your student life, if you like, to manage communications, and manage questions, and manage assignments, and so on. All of those elements. Now, many organizations don't need all of those elements, so the question then becomes, what of those do you need in order to justify an LMS project, which we're going to talk about. So, and what we find as well very often, a lot of organizations will struggle to say, how do I justify an LMS project? Because LMS projects need a budget, they need resourcing. So what we try and get clear right from the beginning is here are the proper costs and here's the proper foundation you need for a project. And the way of justifying it is often not through monetization of the courses themselves, but through proving member value. So essentially, deploying an LMS is partly about the technology, but it's also about enhancing the member value of learning within your membership body, streamlining operations, having your members feel like they're getting a lot more out of the membership and something that will help them with their career, help them run their own business better if it's a B2B model. And usually the justification for it is not always that visible. So, but research shows that well over 90% of members respond that the thing they value most from their membership relationship with you is the learning and education opportunities. So if you're not doing that well, then of course you're going to be at risk of the leaky bucket in terms of your membership. If you are doing it well, then of course that's going to point to success in your main income streams as a membership body. So, do I need an LMS or just an events and training management system? So this is one of the most common questions that we get. So an LMS primarily is designed for delivering the content, not just administering the content. And of course, if you want your learners to be able to interact with the content, if they can pass or fail a piece of content, that's something that steers very strongly towards an LMS. Whereas in terms of events and training management systems, the obverse is true. You typically can't fail a course, an event, or a conference, but you still need to be able to manage people booking on and communications with them, and so on. Very often, the LMS side is not always human attended. So quite a lot of content these days is self-paced, it's digital. And the LMS will manage people's consumption of that content and interaction with that content. Of course, a training and events management system won't manage any of those things. So if you can tick some of the boxes of requiring self-paced content, requiring people to interact, requiring that people can be assessed as part of their content consumption, and you can report back to them on how they're doing with that, then that's leaning more towards an LMS. If you just need to administer people connection to an event or to an activity, then you might not be at the point of needing a learning management system. David, if I could just get your comments, please, on some of that. Do you find that people often don't know quite what they're getting into when it comes to LMS projects, and then can find themselves struggling in the early stages?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's expectation management because people often think, largely because of the lower end of the market, it's just a repository of videos and things like that, and actually
Yes.
get that the point of it is learning stuff, not just stuff. And so to have those expectations correct. So, for example, do you want, like you said earlier, do you need interaction? Are you going to have live tutors or the ability for people to ask stuff on the content, or is it going to be self-paced? Do you want to assess people? Do you want certification? Do you want badging? Do you want these kinds of things? It's as well to get that out in the open to start with. And I think you just, because people are stumbling around in the dark to start with, you
Yes.
need people to ask the right questions, don't you? To give them a plan of how to get through it and what they really, really want.
Absolutely. And that what we've seen very often, and I think you have, David, as well from previous conversations, is because there is such a thing as free LMS systems like Moodle and Canvas and so on. People will think the whole project is free, and then they'll essentially start without the support and tools that they need, and then have an unfortunate outcome from that, which can then diminish their confidence. Well, first of all, it can present a poor reputational outcome for members, but then diminish their confidence when it comes to learning management projects entirely. Great, great. Okay, thank you for that. So what I'd like to then go into is the next section, which is the key steps to launching a successful online training program. So what are the things that you must put in place in order, essentially, not to have a poor outcome from your project? So from the research over hundreds of our own projects and talking to organizations where they've had a failed project or a struggling project, we've cooked it down to the kind of essence of seven major steps, and those are here. So I'll just like to go through these seven steps briefly. We've got actually webinar content on most of these things with a dedicated webinar on a lot of it. So I'll just cover the basics of it, and then David, I just want to get your comments, if I may, as well at the end. Essentially, initial planning, something that sounds idiotic to say, but it's so often forgotten. So, for instance, just measuring what you want out of your LMS project, and how are you going to put numbers to it and then decide if it's been successful with that at the end. Performing an analysis to understand what your audience require and what your organization requires, and then create a project around that. So, for instance, if your goals are around monetization, be clear about that. If your goals are around demonstrating member value and being able to take some of your in-person content and put it online so that your members value it, be clear about that, and then be clear about how you're going to measure those outcomes. Once you've got the what you're going to do, which is what this initial planning is about, you can then have the whole conversation about the how element. But if you haven't done this properly and well, then that's where you're really going to struggle. And by the way, this doesn't take weeks of effort. It can be done in with a few conversations with someone who's been through this before, or with some focus within your own organization in a very short period of time. How to budget and what to budget for. A lot of organizations just think, right, if I pay for the LMS itself and I pay for the supplier, or I get a free one, then that's it. I'm off and running. I can upload some PDFs and I have an LMS system. And the problem with that then tends to be that they've forgotten all of these other bits and pieces that are absolutely required in order to have a successful project. You're either going to do them in-house or you're going to get help to do them. Either way, they must be budgeted for and they must be done. And where people forget about these things is in the early stages of the project, particularly where it's structuring how the project is going to work, structuring who's going to do what, how much resource is going to be required on an ongoing basis, and is essentially setting yourself up for success with it. Things like course content creation and development. How much are you going to spend on that? We've worked on projects where people have spent tens of thousands of pounds per hour of content, and we've worked on projects where people have done it in-house themselves, which is not free, by the way, but it's still in-house. As long as you're budgeting for it and you're setting expectations, then of course it works. Stakeholder engagement, the main thing here is don't try and be the lone ranger. Don't try and do it purely as a technical project, and don't try and do it purely as a learning and development project within one department. It is typically going to require a village. You're going to require help from all over the organization, not the least to talk about how it's going to be integrated with CPD and other events activities that you're running. And of course, you're going to need support on the budgeting technology side and the resourcing side. We have an entire webinar, by the way, on selecting your LMS provider, and it's also a module in the course I was talking about earlier, because finding your technology provider we find to be absolutely as important as choosing the system or choosing what kind of courses content you're going to have. So tendering has to be treated as a proper project with proper resourcing. And set it because you're essentially setting the foundations for years of work ahead of you. We find one of the most important things when it comes to choosing your provider is really about that due diligence of their track record. Find somebody who's done exactly your project with someone else. There is no more important thing than that. The actual technology is less important than that. And your kind of course content is less important than that. Finding someone who can add value and show you how to do it and make sure that you're going to succeed at every stage by seeing that they've done it before is the most important thing we find. With supplier presentations, we find the most important thing is to get widespread buy-in from your colleagues, have an open approach to answering questions, and make it very much about your courses and your content. And then, of course, appointing your preferred supplier as a formal process. Something that's often skipped is just how much work all of that takes. And then, of course, people get exhausted and they just pick one, and the rest becomes the opening chapter in a disaster story. System setup. People often underestimate how much work is involved in this. It's bringing together your learning strategy, your goals with a whole bunch of technology and integrations. So again, that should have all been identified early in the initial planning and should be part of the business case around how much money you're going to need. We can't overstate the importance of piloting. There's every chance you've got it a bit wrong when it comes to your content and a bit wrong when it comes to what your members have said they want and what you've tried to deliver to them. So we find it's incredibly important to have an iterative, continuously iterative process of trying it out, taking the good with the bad, hearing the warts and all feedback from it, and then feeding that into what you do. A lot of projects we do, we encourage people to do things in a very cheap way at the beginning when it comes to content, just the wireframes essentially. Deliver that to a small group, and then only start spending lots of money when you've had that feedback from it. And then your full deployment based on all of those foundational work elements, and then of course that entire monitoring and iteration part of that. So David, you're the veteran of a few learning management projects, and of course NEBOSH exists to provide education and training and support. So could I just ask you, what are your thoughts on where organizations are most commonly likely to get it wrong? And what kind of things do you find as most important in terms of making sure you don't get it wrong and you're going to set yourself up to have a successful project?
I think it's a sort of expectations. like all technology projects, you stumble around in the dark like a drunk person to start with because you don't know what you don't know. So there is a heavy reliance on expertise outside of the company, and you can often be realistic. Um, and you sort of think almost, I mean, you've got a stepwise process here, but as you alluded to, it isn't really totally stepwise because some of these things you cycle round and revisit because you don't know everything at the beginning of your planning thing. You discover things as you go through and your likes and dislikes and the direction changes, which is important, like you said, to not do things really elaborately to start with. You wireframe things. You sort out your objectives because the actual technology and the actual detail doesn't matter as much as fulfilling your objectives. What you don't want is almost to the man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yes.
So what you get is people are fixated on everything must be video, and actually that gets so the learning outcomes get kind of like pushed away based on the technology and your method. Well, the methods serve your objective, your learning outcomes. So you need to decide what it is you want to achieve from this and what your learning is designed to do. And then you can make there's a range of choices within that. I think with a lot of projects like this, you can be too ambitious and want to do
Mm.
everything
Yes.
perfectly. And as a result, your budget skyrockets, the delivery date extends, and you never deliver anything. So you need to be very clear on what you will live with to start with. And then it's a cycle of improvement. And so the piloting, I think, is really important, like you said.
I really
To
like the sound of that, David,
Yeah.
and I wish more organizations would kind of start in that small way and build out because I'm sure you've seen it too. It can be incredibly stressful and unpleasant for people when they're stuck in a project that isn't working or in some kind of dispute with budgets with their supplier. Or content that's just not getting any take up. So yes, exactly, exactly as you say. Can I just ask you your thoughts on um, once the system is up and running, um, how do you find that people tend to underestimate again the amount of kind of care and feeding these kind of projects take, these kind of content and production and keeping it going? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even if you've got a fairly settled learning content in there, and so you've deployed a lot, just simple things like customer queries, like, oh, there's a mistake in this part of the thing, or I can't get this to work, or I've lost my login things, even though you've got a forgotten password thing, you get a hell of a lot of queries that you think are self-service, which aren't. So you need people to support it. You can't just leave it and let it go. And of
Yes,
course, technology and people's expectations move on as well. It's a bit like fashion, isn't it? You go back to something that you did a while ago and it looks tired, out of date, and unstylish. So you need to sort of revamp stuff and update it. You need to not only the content itself in terms of technical stuff, but also the way that it appears, the way that it people expect it to work as well. I think one of the things I learned as well is that people put in loads of bells and whistles, which are then difficult to maintain.
yes,
And trivial stuff like it might be a really, really simple learning point, but they put in lots of interaction and then ignore the interaction which is needed on a difficult concept where it would make more impact. So I think it's a sort of a risk-based thing, putting your effort into the bits that will lead to better learning, not just bells and whistles for the hell of it. So, and
yes.
that requires a bit of maintaining. Yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more. And we do find that people kind of create over elaborate content in some cases where and then they might be neglecting the main things that I've seen a project recently where the main things that their members were consuming was written 5 years ago. and it just was so desperately in need of a wash and brush up and an improvement of the navigation and how people could monitor how they were doing and within the courses and so on. But it was always the next thing that they were spending all of the money on. Great, that's great feedback. Thanks so much, David. Okay, so then let's get into a neat segue then into building scalable content for diverse member needs. It's never been a more exciting time for content creators, by the way, and learning and development creators, because there's this whole world of AI which is banging on our doors now. And in fact, we have a webinar at the end of next month, which I'll invite you to as part of the follow-up from this, which covers the whole AI and innovation and what's new in the world of learning and development. Okay, so in terms of building up new content and appropriate content for your diverse member needs. Let me just put it all on the screen. So the first thing is about identifying needs, and we've talked about piloting a lot because it matters so much. You don't presume you know everything. Don't presume the feedback you heard last year is the feedback you'll get now. So continuously monitoring and then mapping your learning objectives to what people are telling you. If people are saying, I need to do this in my career, I want this this will help me with my assessment, this is what's really going to get me that job, then of course you need to respond to that and bring those language elements into your courses and bring those physical elements into what's on offer to people. We found that there's a tendency in the past to develop hour-long and half an hour-long courses, and then they kind of collapse under their own weight in the development phase. So what we've seen to be much more successful is lots of daisy-linked tiny bits of content that make the big difference for people. So keeping it small, keeping it modular, and keeping it linked. Use of different formats and multimedia is now easier and cheaper for associations than it ever has been before. So things like interaction, gamification, we're going to show you a bit of that in a second, videos, even AI-driven avatars are all much more affordable, and keep things light, keep things interesting, and stop it being that just almost like a PowerPoint PDF, page, boring people to death. And using with multimedia, making sure you're adhering to accessibility standards, again, cheaper and easier than it ever has been before. Choosing the right technology supplier will help you with all of this. A lot of it can be self-served. Then the 9 steps to creating a learning strategy that's really going to work for you. I'll just put this all on the screen because we're going to send this to you, and I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on the webinar. But essentially, that learning objectives identification, that does range from we want to make a lot of money out of this through to we want to stop our members leaving, we want to help recruit young people, etc. It's all of those things, and then making sure that you're understanding that in terms of the kind of content you're going to create. Are you going to create formal qualifications? Are you going to have a certification process? How can people pass and fail? How are you going to add credibility to your content so that it then becomes something that people are prepared to pay for, or at least prepared to stay in membership in order to achieve? So however you do it, we find it's just vital to go through each of these steps and make sure that you put thought into each one of them, so that you're building your project on a really solid foundation, and it then just doesn't become a mystery element. So David, if I may again, in terms of then the kind of content and the kind of media you might use, and then the steps towards deploying your learning content strategy. Can I just get your thoughts on what you found to be very important in your own learning and development at NEBOSH?
Yeah, I think an early decision we made is that we wanted to maximize the value that we got from our content and minimize the sort of maintenance of it. So we went for modularization fairly early on. And within something like Moodle, you can effectively use things like meta courses, which basically essentially are different ways of stringing together those modules to make it look like different courses. So you can have different pathways through it. And that worked quite effectively, because then they pointed to, there were common modules that different courses pointed to, but it appeared like different course. And so you've got fewer things to maintain. You can have separate forums and separate interactions around that, but actually you can do that. So that was really important. Whereas if you don't realize that early on, you create a monster for yourself by having duplicated content and therefore a much, much bigger problem with maintaining it and looking through it. So that was an early thing. I think as well, the stuff that we mentioned about understanding your audience and what they're trying to get out of it. Are they just doing it just for something to read? Or do you actually want them to evidence the learning? So, for example, is it just an article, or is it something that they need to reflect on for things like CPD, and record it? And you can record that in the system. Do you want them to go further and get a certificate? Do you, etc. So this all has design considerations, but you need to sort of decide that early on because it influences how you put the stuff together and maintain it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And by the way, we've had some great questions coming through on the Q&A chat. So please, if this is spurring you to think about your own project, please drop a question in, and we'll get to that. Okay. What we'll talk about just briefly now is the tools and technology that you need to be thinking about to simplify your course creation and management. So on that. One of the common mistakes is people think that all I need is a learning management system. And it is true that many learning management systems, for instance, will have authoring tools, but in those tools, in the LMS itself. But the fact is, those authoring tools tend to be poor. Even on high cost LMS systems, the course authoring element of it is inevitably a compromise. And across many systems, I've never seen it be as good as the dedicated authoring tools. So even if you're using relatively basic content, what we find is that by using authoring tools that are themselves not expensive, the presentation of it can be vastly better. The navigation, the back and forth, the monitoring of where you are within the content, the ability to add some degree of interaction relatively simply. So we would always suggest that people budget for a proper authoring tool, and that it'll just take very tired content sometimes and make it look vastly better without too much cost being involved. Again, LMSs will often have their own inbuilt analytics and insights tools. They can be okay. Depending on how sophisticated you want to be, you can get into analysis paralysis and so on. But the key thing is to learn them and to make sure that you use them. But there are also external analysis tools, depending on how much you want to be going. You have to just allow the time and effort and sometimes the budget for doing that. Then the integration with your existing systems is often forgotten as a budgetary area. And the fact is that an LMS, if it's in isolation and not integrated, is going to be a pretty poor experience for your members, and you're actually not going to get too much benefit out of it. You actually want to have, we find it's vital not just for things like CPD, etc., but just for being able to communicate effectively with your members and show them that you understand them. You really need to have their learning and development performance updated into your core membership CRM so that you can write them context sensitive content. When they come to the website, that website can show them information about themselves that's drawn from the membership CRM. So quite a sophisticated integration should be budgeted for and should be allowed for. So David, just a brief comment from you. I guess you do some element of all of this at NEBOSH.
Yeah.
Have you found that external tools are required, or do you find that the LMS itself tends to be enough?
Yeah, I think I mean, we mainly use Moodle, and I've used Moodle quite a lot in the past as well. And I mean, I'm not going to say that the tools are poor because they're quite good. They're sort of fit for purpose, but you can get much better results using dedicated tools like lots of things. We use Articulate 360, Articulate Rise, and what we found is, particularly because you can extend it with Java, you can do
Yes.
things in that you are a good workaround for things you couldn't have done within the LMS itself. So you can get it to do calculations and things within the SCORM package that you produce and upload that you wouldn't have been able to do within that. So you can make it more sophisticated.
Yeah.
With analytics and insights, I found that you can often get plugins, like for example with Moodle, you can get SQL query plugins because underlying a lot of these things are a SQL database. You can then formulate your own SQL queries, and even though the system wouldn't have done that analytics natively, you can get it to get the data that you need by knowing the underlying data structure. And certainly the integration with existing systems, we've often had to do that. So for example, in the past, we've been able to link in by automatically allocating students to different groups by using web services, because a lot of these things are open source, so you can actually reveal the underlying structures and actually communicate with it. So actually, yeah, we've used all of those three, and you do need to use all of those three at different stages. Yeah.
Exactly. And so often forgotten, and then people
Yeah.
struggle
Yeah.
with
And
the
it
outcomes.
costs money because you have to, engage programmers for some of it. But some of it you can do yourself. Yeah.
Exactly. Fantastic. Great. Thank you so much for that. And then how to leverage your LMS so that it actually pays for your organization, whether that's in money terms or in member value terms. So one of the things we found to be extremely important is recognizing the role of automation. We talk a lot about this in the AI webinar, LMS webinar with AI at the end of February. But actually, it's been around for many years, so that in a simpler way, so that you can automate communications, automate feedback surveys, automate the whole service delivery to your learners, and your members and learners will get a better experience, and your staff won't feel like they're overwhelmed with that. Uh, Personalization is now much easier than it ever has been before. But the more you're showing that your learners that you and your members that you understand them, and you're saying, here's what I think you should do next, based on this event you just attended over here in a completely different system. We think that this particular course over here would then benefit you in your career, or based on the fact that you're reading this thing on an e-shop we sent out or an article on our website. Or that you did this previous course, here is the next thing for you, or we've just created this and we think it's the most relevant thing for you. Members really value that. A small fraction of them will actually take the course. It almost doesn't matter. They're seeing that you're sending out targeted, relevant information to them, so they will value the relationship more. And then the continuous feedback and the surveys coming from that. We find that to be extremely important. Now, I know, David, from Nibosh's point of view, learning is such an important part of membership. You're almost in that extreme end in terms of membership organizations. Lots of other organizations, they're having to justify the role of learning much harder. What have you found really matters in terms of proving the value to your own organization, if you like, in investing in learning? And what do members really value out of the whole learning provision from NEBOSH?
Yeah, I mean we've been around for a long time, so well established. So we're principally an examination body for health and safety. So that almost speaks, well, it does speak for itself. So there is a need out there, and people are motivated to learn it, particularly because it's vocational. They want it for their jobs. So it's not hard to justify
Yes.
because jobs make, give you income, and obviously in health and safety there is the potential that you could reduce harm and save people's lives at the end of the day. So it has sort of moral reasons as well as people having a livelihood.
Yes, the challenge tends to be, I find, with if your profession is in plumbing or accounting or town planning or whatever it is, sometimes it's harder to get that relationship between the learning you're providing to your
Yeah.
members, which is will be seen by the accountants as simply a net outgoing cost because you're not selling the courses individually, uh, and the value you're providing. You know how you're able to justify your membership proposition to them. So that often takes a bit of work. But yes, as I say, with NEBOSH, it's built into the name. You have to provide it as part of who you are.
I
Great.
don't know how
Okay.
it works with you, Alan, but my what I
Please.
often find is that if you call something a pilot, it takes away all the scariness away, and people
Yes.
are much more on board with it. And rather than the scary, oh, we're doing this, you say, right, we're doing a pilot to get data and information as to whether it's worth doing, and I think people get on board with that a lot easier.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good thing. We call it, yes, a pilot proof of concept strategy project. Absolutely, for all of those reasons. So, really common challenges. Uh, and how to overcome them. So stakeholder resistance is surprisingly common. One of the many problems is getting people to understand the value of a learning management project, and also to understand where it fits into the entirety of events and CPD and the existing courses and training that you might provide in person. So you can find it needs a lot of education to get people on board. There are significant technical challenges. We've talked about those. And then it can be, whilst we are very much advocating starting small and building up, scalability can be a challenge. And by the way, a number of LMS systems can get very expensive as your number of learners grows and so on. So getting transparency about that early on can be really important. Okay, I'm going to try and go a bit faster. What I'd like to do is do a quick demo of a modern LMS in action. And what I want to show here is this is probably some of the most modern kind of LMS techniques that are currently in use. So it uses gamification scenarios and AI-driven avatars and video and all of that. We'll just do it really fast. The kind of spoiler on this is that it's all been done using Moodle, which is the free, inverted commas, free open source LMS. And the point really is that you can do anything on any LMS. So the real thing that will make the difference is choosing your technology supplier and that proper foundation of what you're trying to achieve. So let's get onto that, and then we can just get any comments later. Okay, let's jump into the course Managing Technology Projects for Business People. So you first of all start on the learning platform on the Get Savvy website and you log in. So let's do that. I'll just quickly go through the sign in process. And then once you're in, it takes you through your personal dashboard that shows you all of the courses you've got on the go and where you are on every course. So I'll jump into the course here. Uh, it then shows me all of the modules of the course. In this case, all of the modules make up the technology life cycle of a project in your own organization. Everything from the conceptualization, should we do the project or not, how much is it going to cost, all of the way through supplier selection, testing, preparation for go live, managing stroppy colleagues. There's a module for all of that. And then at the end, there is the assessment that gives you the qualification at the end of the course. So what I'll do is I'll jump quickly into the tour of the supplier selection module. And then you can then just press begin to launch that module and get into the content. So first things first, there's an introduction to your avatars, your trainers that are going to teach you everything you need to know about running a supplier selection without having a bunch of arguments later. And then it steps you through the project pathway, which is essentially the whole journey through your project with, in this case, a focus on the supplier selection process. So let's get into the learning outcomes for this module. What this tells you is that you'll get everything you need in order to make sure that you can have a supply selection process that has a successful outcome at the end of it, and this is what you'll get out of the module. Then there's all of the supporting information that tells you what you need to know in order to be a successful project manager within this module here. So there's the project brief, there is the templates. This part of the course tells you about your different stakeholders that you need to work with and keep satisfied on the project. The operations director, the finance director, they'll have their different needs from the project. Moving on from there, every module has a suite of templates, which are project documents that you can download and use on your own projects that give you everything you need to manage that particular part of your own project. So, jumping straight into the phases of a supplier selection process, all of these screens are interactive, and you work your way through each of the 5 phases of the selection process, with it telling you what you need to know, what you must do, what you absolutely must not do in order to avoid problems at each stage. So the module works by giving you real-world scenarios that tell you what you must.
What is the best way to make sure the process to select a supplier is fair and legal?
There are some key things we can do to make sure everyone can see the process is fair and auditable. We have to make sure the rules and criteria of the selection process are made clear to all the suppliers in the RFP and also to our internal selection team. All potential suppliers are treated equally. For instance, if one of them requires more time or additional meetings, then this must be offered to the others too. Our internal selection team commits the appropriate time and attends all the relevant meetings. You cannot compare the suppliers fairly if you don't attend all the meetings. We complete all evaluation documentation throughout the process to show an auditable trail and facilitate the decision-making phase.
Every module has a check your understanding or a quiz at the end. So let's start with question 1. This is an example of a yes-no question. So if we just work our way through there, putting our yeses or our nos, and then submit our answer, unfortunately, that's not correct in this case. And every question gives you a diagnostic with feedback to tell you where you've gone wrong and which topics you might want to revisit to refresh your memory. So then if we carry on, question 1 is red because I got it wrong. Let's go to question 2. This one is a drag and drop example. So if I quickly drag the answers on, and then we'll submit the answer onto there. And again, unfortunately, I got it wrong, but it's giving me more feedback, and I can always try again. So question 2 is now red, and then overall is telling me that I haven't passed the activity because I didn't get enough correct answers. I can retake it or continue. And then, of course, I get my milestone checklist telling me how I've done overall and what I mustn't forget in order to have a successful outcome from this phase of my real-world project. Once I've done the module, I'm back to my dashboard and I can proceed to the next module, or I can stop-start anything at my own pace as often as I like. And then, of course, once I've finished all of my modules, I can do my final assessment that gives me the qualifications. In this case, it's 50 questions, all based on the content of the course. And I go through answering each question in different formats to keep it all interesting. So in this case, it's a simple. So let me just go through and just ask questions from the Q&A, if I may. So what we've got some Q&A questions in, and David, if I could fire this one at you. So the questions come in saying, is an LMS suitable for hosting live or online training only? Or is that better served by a training or event system? And then sounds like LMS is better for e-learning, self-paced content. Thanks. So if you want me to read that question again, but
No,
does
I
that make?
think
Yes?
no, I think you could do it for any. It's like you were saying earlier on. I mean, a lot of these have plugins for things like live training. If you're going to do it live remote training, and also hosting like Blue, is it Big Blue? Things like that plugins
Yes.
for sort of webinars within it. So you just create it as an activity within the system, and you schedule it in and do it, or do it instantaneously, and you can do it. So the reality is it's sort of agnostic. You can use it for all sorts. I've used it for live training. I've used it for supported e-learning, where you're actually running it, just answering questions, but also putting things into forums, having weekly meetings and sessions with your students, as well as the completely self-paced stuff, which is largely unsupported apart from sort of queries where people just rattle through a fairly small module for a bite-sized bit of learning and don't require a lot. So you can do what you like, really. I mean, you're not constrained. Yeah.
Exactly. I had one organization recently where the learning and direct learning manager was talking about the difference in recent years has gone from like scheduled television, where everyone, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, would sit around and watch one or two channels. So
Like the
things
Open
were.
University. Yeah. Do you remember
Yes,
BBC?
yes, absolutely. Open University at 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
It's gone from things on a schedule that you would put on your learning calendar because it was happening at a time with an individual presenting the content and so on. And it's moved to much more of a kind of Netflix model where people can pick it and watch and consume
On
um,
demand. Yeah.
on demand, exactly right. So the short answer is that learning management is used very commonly for both. So hosting online live training, if you like, and on demand. However, what I would say is if you are only doing live training, so essentially it's just a funnel for either getting people into a room at the same time or very commonly onto the same Zoom meeting at the same time, it may be that you don't actually need an LMS for that. Those things are managed very well in training and administration systems. Where you would cross over into needing an LMS is where you are doing more on-demand content and there's an assessment element perhaps, and of course where you want people to be able to interact with that content. But certainly LMS systems very commonly are used for both live delivery and all of the communications and the conversations around that, as well as on-demand training. Thank you so much, David. We've got another question from Evelyn or Evelyn. Earlier, you had an LMS and training events management systems as separate. If we were to need the booking and e-commerce elements for our LMS as well, are there LMS systems that do both the learning and e-commerce, or is it a case of integrating e-commerce systems with the LMS? David, do you have any thoughts on that?
I've come across both. You can do some things externally with connect in an automated way with your CRM, for example, using web services. So
Yes.
you connect in, and sometimes there are just simple plugins. Like I mentioned earlier on, Moodle has a very vibrant, not vibrant, very active community of contributors, being open source, but even proprietary stuff will usually add stuff where you can usually find something which does what you do, like the e-commerce plugins, things like that. But it depends on your mix, like you were saying. If you're veering way over to one side, you're better off getting a system which is dedicated to that because it'll do it better than Moodle and other things which are designed more holistically. I came across this with if it trying to do very large scale exams on Moodle is quite difficult because the marking and things like that are much clunkier at large scale than
Yes.
they are in a dedicated assessment package. So I think it's the same. You just have to get the right technology to fulfill your objective because there'll be a whole load out there that you're not using within Moodle and you don't need if you're just doing one aspect.
Yes, I agree. And another part of the answer is as well that yes, you can very much, as David has said, get your LMS to do the e-commerce side. But what we'd always encourage people to do is think of the big picture. So what can undermine your presence to your members is that if they have to go into the event system to book this and do e-commerce that way for this or that for the annual conference and so on, and then do an entirely different thing going into the LMS to pay for this course, you can find yourself where they have to almost log in twice, they have to register twice, they certainly have to get their credit card out twice. So that may or may not be acceptable to people. Often some element of that is not acceptable. So thinking about it in the round in terms of your overall website, it's as common now that when people are doing e-commerce, they'll use the LMS or the events and training system to put it into the shopping basket, if you like. But the shopping basket itself is in the main website. So you only have to do it once. You could buy an event and a course at the same time. And it's a much more streamlined process for your member.
Basically, you do it, you pay for it, and as soon as you pay for it in the shop, you get a link to your course, and it's single sign-on straight into the LMS. So
Exactly.
you can do it, lots of different ways, but it depends what you want, because you're right. If you're putting lots and lots of different systems that looks really fragmented, and you put barriers in people's way, you affect and make it awkward for people. You defeat the very purpose that you're trying to fulfill. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so I think we've got time for one more question, which is, David, from your experience, if people are going to do an LMS project, would they have to start again with their events and training system, or could they add that on as an addition to the events and training system?
Well, I think you could do both, but it depends on the state of what you've got already. If what you've got already is pretty crap, basically, and you're not happy with it, you might be, as well, instead of tinkering with it and getting it to work and having lots of workarounds, you might be better off going back to basics and thinking, right, what are my objectives here? Is there something now which actually does this well? And that's where you need the expertise of people like you to help direct people, as to keep them on what their objective is, not on the technology.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Fantastic. All right. So we're out of time. Thanks so much for the guidance there, David. So just to finish off by thanking everyone for attending. We'll provide everything as we've said. Please do yourself a favor and take advantage of the discount code we'll send you. We're going to be sending you some free job aids and templates that will help you in your own project. This is just a thank you for us for attending. So one of those is the pros and cons of free versus chargeable LMS systems, so that you can see what the different factors are when you're considering making that decision. We're going to send you some Dear Savvy articles. Please join the Dear Savvy community, which is where people come along and vent and share war stories and awful things that have happened with their peers, and get advice and help from their peers about that. And then we really love to see you at our next webinar. I'll invite you in the follow-up, which is at the end of February, and it's about future-proofing member education. So before you jump straight into the 1990s with your next project, why don't you attend this webinar, so that you at least the next things you do are modern and taking advantage of things that have made it much cheaper and much more accessible for associations to have really funky learning and development content. Let me finish again by saying thank you so much to David. Great insights, great help for everybody. And everybody, thank you so much for attending, and hope to see you on the next webinar. Thank you so much.